So here's a confession. The work that I do in Grenada, helping folks relocate, sometimes gets me labeled as a colonizer. In this conversation with David McQueen, who I am currently working with as he explores his own moves to the Caribbean, we don't avoid that. In fact, we go straight into it. Why? Because if you are part of the diaspora and thinking about land or business or coming back to the Caribbean, you're probably going to have to navigate that question too at some point. And to be honest, this is a conversation that most folks in the relocation space avoid having. So let's get started.
Again, as I said, having this discussion with on the podcast that I was on and saying, I'm going to go into St. Patrick's and I'm going to take over my grandma's land and what have you. I was being tongue in cheek, and obviously I realized that some people don't understand it as much. But the principle is right. How do we take ownership? How do we honestly be in a space where we move past that inaction because somebody didn't want to do something, but do it in a way that everybody benefits? So for me, being able to kind of, if I'm going to go and have land that was my grandmother's land, which had visited before, my thing is, as part of the lineage, that's what I have in it. And it's not even that big, to be honest with you, right? It's not even that big. If I wanted to kind of like have my whole thing, I just go and buy land somewhere else in St. Patrick. But there is something around being able to go, I want to continue that legacy. And I guess more than anything else, I think it's a conversation that we all need to have around what's the legacy that we're continuing of our parents and their parents, and saying, right, we're, yes, we, at least when we're here, we're in a space where we're still, okay, we're foreigners kind of like coming back, but this is still part of our heritage. I
Yeah.
feel more at home in Grenada and Barbados than I do in the UK, even though I've lived my whole life in the UK. I was going to say the connectivity for me is when I put my foot on soil and my foot lands on soil,
Yeah,
I feel that this is where I'm supposed to be.
yeah. And so for people watching who just know you as the potential land thief, who
Yes.
is David McQueen? Like, tell us your credentials other than like swiping left.
I love that, man. The potential land thief. Okay, so background is I am my dad's from Grenada. My dad's from his family are born in McQueen's, born and raised in Sotiers up in Mali, and my mother's from Barbados, but I'm born and raised in the UK. I am a Pan African, so I'm very deeply um, connected to the Africanness of my roots. Predominantly, when I did my history, it's West Africa, so it's like Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria. I know that we've got rootage in there, and I think that there's something around the spiritual, musical, emotional connection that we have over years that I just want to continue to have when I do eventually decide that I want to spend more of my life over this side of the world. But business wise, I run my own leadership consultancy. I also have a small venture that I'm building at the moment, which focuses on people being able to acquire and collect art of Caribbean and African descent. And my third kind of like angle is that I'm very much into sustainability. So, my aim is that once I do, break ground, I was watching the Polaris video the other day. That's why it's in my head, right? But once I do break ground, I want that house to be sustainable. I want it to have water that won't just depend on the grid. I want it to be built in such a way that it will be sustainable, that if there becomes a hurricane, you've got sustainability around there. I want to be able to um, plant food so that it's there's a powerful thing I saw, and I think we may have talked about it, but there's when we were talking previously, like in Israel, there are some people, whichever way you want to look around the politics of it, but there are some people who have been taught how to survive off half an acre. And I love that concept that, whilst we are part of a larger community, there should be some ways of being able to sustain ourselves locally. So yeah, man, whether it's quails or chickens, and being able to get my 4 level, what's that thing called? What's it called? There's a form of gardening. The name's gone from me now.
Permaculture.
Syntro-
Oh,
syntropic
okay.
syntropic agroforestry. That's what it's called. So that's like you'd have your piece of land, but you'd have like a coconut tree or guava trees, and then you have another piece of land. You have another set of trees underneath it, which are the layer underneath it with a kind of like canopy, and then you have some more underneath it, which are like your crops and what have you. And the whole point of doing that is like a rainforest, right? So when we're living in a space where we've got lots of rain, and you've got amazing soil, one of the things that happens, and the reasons why a lot of Caribbean nations haven't been self-sufficient, is because they haven't looked after the soil. And so the whole point of having those trees is going back to, the indigenous ways that we were able to plant and harvest on our land. So yeah, I'm very much, I'm quite entrepreneurial, which is probably why people think I'm a land thief. But I'm also incredibly passionate about community and seeing how we can work together, and in a small way, because you can't beat a whole system, but in a small way do things that are anti-capitalist and see about how we can cooperate and make things work. Does
Interesting.
that
I
make sense?
never, it does, but I never would have had you down as an anti-capitalist person at all. And also quite
I'm a free market.
entrepreneurial.
I'm a free marketer. I'm a free,
Yes.
I make it really clear. I've got no problem with the free market. I think that we should be able to go out, and I think we should be able to trade, and the demand and the supply of the market should be able to determine that. But capitalism is extractive. It takes out, and it rewards those who take out and keep it to themselves and never give back. Whereas for me, I'm like, if having a home in Grenada, whether it's my family home or my own, is literally going, right, you know what? If I grow something here, I want children to be able to come to that space and learn how to farm. I'd like them to come in and see a chicken there so that they can go and collect or get their own eggs and have that stuff done in that space. Yes, you still do a little bit of a trade in there and what have you, but it's not exploitative.
Yeah.
It's not done to the extent where people feel like, oh, this person is just coming in and they're just taking some stuff out. And for me, I'm like, on developing that as well, I'd like to do farm to table. And farm to table for me as well goes, right, what young talent do I have in the area who could cook, who could prepare that stuff and get paid for it? And that for me is free marketing, but not capitalist. I don't like capitalists. I think capitalism and the tie that it's had to slavery and colonialism and exploitation, capitalism has made many of our Caribbean islands still have beaches that are private.
Mm. Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Another thing I'm going to push back on is like quite entrepreneurial. I feel like that's like the most underselling of who you are and your experience today. And the reason I push back on that as well is that my personal opportunity that I feel that some islands like Grenada don't explore really is understanding like just how spectacular our diaspora are, like our second and third generation. And the fact is that many of us are working with amazing people, amazing brands, amazing companies, and we could go anywhere in the world.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
tell us a bit
Yeah.
about your background and who you've worked with, but why you still care about Grenada, why you still care about Barbados, because I have family who are like, yeah, if it comes to a holiday, I'm going to Zanzibar, I'm going to Dubai. Why am I going to Grenada? For like,
Yeah.
it's not cheap.
Yeah.
And the service you
Yeah.
can get in other places is also a lot better as well. So I think it's really important for folks watching to understand that it's really useful not to take the diaspora for granted and to really
Yeah.
understand like, the talent that we have at our
Mhm.
fingertips and the network and everything else. So maybe you can kind of illustrate how
Yeah.
it shows up for you.
Well, I think there's two things. The older I've gotten, the more I've realized how powerful the diaspora actually is. And there are people who can probably think of Kwame Kwei-Armah or Kirani James or one or two other individuals who are kind of like the normal, or Steve McQueen, the kind of like the headline names. But one of the things I've learned is that there is an incredible um, spread of who we are and what we do around the world and in the diaspora. And for me, I realized that it can be quite challenging, because when you're in, if one of the conversations I had, especially when I was there last, is if you're on the island, you're looking for opportunity, and if it's not on the island, you're going to get up and go, and you're
Mhm.
going to go elsewhere, which is probably why, and I don't know what the data is, but there's probably more people in the diaspora directly or indirectly than they are in Grenada, and obviously there's space and there's containment or whatever. But what I love about the opportunity of being able to be quite entrepreneurial is that we're really good at finding solutions. I'll give you three quick examples if I can,
Mhm.
and I'm going to put them out there, and I hope somebody takes it and runs with it. But one of the things that really struck me when Hurricane Beryl came was, obviously there was this massive devastation specifically in Carriacou and Petit Martinique, and one of the things that I realized in the diaspora people were really fretting about were getting hold of family.
Mhm.
And my gut feeling was, on those islands, there should have been a satellite phone, because regardless of what would actually happen, once you're there and the sky is clear, you can put in a satellite phone up, and they've been using that for years to connect with people. And if you're in a specific village, you can call family, you can connect, boom, boom, boom. And so, again, if somebody takes the idea and run with it, and I like to speak these ideas out loud, I love to say them out loud because I just hope that in that space, somebody will just go in there and just take it and run with it. But if you have got a satellite phone, that's a part of the community, right? Not some conglomerate coming in there and charging you stupid money, but you've got one that's part of the community. For me, that's incredibly powerful because that's about communication. And one of the things that, again, as I said, I realize around Beryl is that we are going to get more storms. In the Caribbean. So how are we building stuff sustainably to make sure that happens? I think the second bit was about the hospital that's been done, and I know it can be a bit, I'm not shy in coming forward, right? I'm not shy in speaking out, but I know that as on the one side, there is this amazing kind of this collaboration with Mount Sinai Hospital in the US, and it's real fervor to kind of like get it done. But I know on the other hand, there are people who are kind of like going, do you know what? I don't really trust some of the people who are actually going to be in that space. And I think there's an opportunity when you are entrepreneurial to go, okay, what can we learn from this? And one of the things that I would definitely learn from just seeing about the hospital is that the hospitals are being built so that they are resistant to hurricanes. And for me, if we look historically at a lot of the houses that were in the Caribbean before colonialization, they were designed to withstand wind.
Mm.
So you had lots of round houses. You had houses with the windows so the wind can blow through. You had houses with courtyards, and look, I'm incredibly cognizant that when we're driving down roads, we can see houses on the side of the road which are just over the gully, which are just over the precipice. So not everybody's going to be able to do that. But I think there's some space to go. Okay, how can we, even if we're building smaller houses, how can we think beyond the post-colonial way of things that were architected? How can we think of ways that if a strong wind does come in, we're building with materials and we're building with design, even for those who don't necessarily have a lot of money, to think about how we can do it differently. And for me, having that conversation with individuals around that for me is important. And so you asked a question around the kind of like background. So I've been really fortunate so my first career was I was an accountant because obviously our parents wanted to have a degree in something, right? For me, one of the four. I didn't even finish my degree, but I was an accountant. And one of the beautiful things about being an accountant is that you learn a lot around business and you learn a lot around how business runs. And I moved from there into IT. But for both of those, I ended up, I did a lot of presenting. I always done it from church, right? Always presenting, always being in the space, trying to explain complex issues and making them a lot simpler. And so I got to work with some amazing people like Sir Richard Branson. I got to work with JP Morgan, the big banks. I've worked with lots of the telecom companies, and I've learned away how a lot of these organizations have worked from the big corporates who are slow to move to the smaller ones who are a lot more nimble. And for me, I think there are opportunities. Like, for example, this is my third one. So I've done the phone one. I've done the stuff around the housing. But the third one, I think, is an incredible, powerful one, is to have something around our financial literacy. Mm. And what I mean by that, and I share this with you in a conversation that we had before, 260 billion pounds is sent in the diaspora to Africa, the Caribbean, and the Latin America in any given year. 260 billion, right? That's 9 zeros. And of that 260 billion, between 7 to 9% goes in fees to the large companies. All right. Well, I'm not going to name their names now because I know we're going to put this out, right? But you know who the big ones are. And so and then you've got the issues that some of the big banks won't bank in there because they think, the Caribbean is high risk. But I'm like, you might say that, but that's 260 billion pounds worth of money coming in. That's more than most countries get in aid in any given year. And that's more than the GDP of some countries. So I'm thinking to myself, well, wouldn't it make sense for, in the same way we had Partner, and a lot of our parents in the UK and in America and in Canada, or where they were in the diaspora, because they didn't have favorable rates to go and get mortgages and loans from banks, we collectively put together our money and being quite cooperative. And I look at that and I go, there are so many instruments that we can use to think about how we're going to use our money. And look, at the end of the day, I'm consciously aware that there are going to be some money that's going to be pegged to the US dollar. That's fine, but there are alternatives. So how do we transfer money? I don't know if it exists, and please tell me, correct me if I'm right here, but we don't have the equivalent of a PayPal or Stripe. When I look into on some of the territories that we have, and I go, okay, so the Americans don't want to mess with us. That's fine. Let's go and create our own. Let's go and create our own stuff and have a bit of sovereignty around what that transfer looks like. And like even when I think about Kenya, and Kenya's got this fantastic infrastructure where they just do money on the phone, and then they have those portals. Why can we not do something as similar? And so I look at it and I go, I'm like, how do I go to those spaces, use my wisdom, use my knowledge, work with young entrepreneurs and young financially literate people who are creative entrepreneurs, who are business-minded entrepreneurs, who are tech-minded, who are food and agricultural entrepreneurs, working within the individuals there and tapping them into the wider network and the diaspora, as well as locally, and going, right, how do we build that up? So that bit for me is really important, where I realize that I want to be able to take that opportunity and push back against a lot of the naysayers, because a lot of people, when I've spoken about this in the past, go, there are people in the Caribbean, they're not really entrepreneurial, they just want to work for the government. And I'm like, okay, that might be fine. But if I take a kid, all right, and I put a camera in his hand and tell him, listen, I want you to do this thing and I want you to record it on TikTok, or I want you to put it up on a YouTube short or an Instagram, it's a totally different generation. It's a totally different ways of connecting. And if that person knows that they can get a certain amount of dollars doing that more than they can if they were going out and doing their job, I think you start to shift it. You start to shift the behavior patterns. You start to shift the possibilities. And for a lot of individuals who are running away from what were traditional kind of careers like farming or agriculture, because parents just wanted them to be professional, you can go, look, I can work entrepreneurially on this and probably earn more than the people who are actually doing the professional stuff itself. And so for me, it comes back to that point I was saying about earlier. That's why I say I'm a free marketer, because I see the opportunities, but not where it's extractive, where people are being exploited.
Yeah. And what I think talking to you, one of the things that I really love is that your generosity of ideas. It's not like, okay, this is my idea, let me keep it secret because someone's going to steal it. It's like, no, there's
Yeah.
so much going on in the world. Like creativity is like a skill set. How do we let these ideas blossom? And I
Yeah.
definitely noticed it in Grenada, I guess because it's smaller, and things just work differently. People tend to hold on to ideas. And when it
Yeah.
comes to innovation, that makes things incredibly challenging.
Mm.
And I know that one of the privileges that I definitely have, which is completely unearned, is that I'm able to do that thing that pretty much every foreigner who comes to Grenada, and I'm calling myself a foreigner even though I'm not, but we walk down the street, we see the mangoes on the floor, and you're like, do you know how much this would be at Waitrose or Whole Foods? Um, and I guess we have that benefit of being able to see, okay, this is how things are here. This is
Yeah.
how things are there. How do we join the dots? Not like how do we
Yeah.
extract and exploit, but how do we create bridges for those sorts of opportunities? And I think for me, this is why I love bringing folks from the diaspora together. This is why I love
Yeah.
bringing folks from the diaspora to Grenada, because I generally feel that aside from how people might interpret what you said in your video, it's not about what's in this for me. It's about how can I take what I have already and allow that to amplify and scale in terms of impact in the
Yes.
destination where people might not have the same opportunities that I've
Yeah.
had.
Yeah.
One of the criticisms that a friend of mine often labels towards me is that he calls me a colonizer.
Yeah.
Um, and so I have to recognize the degree to which my thinking has been shaped by growing up in the UK, where we do have a
Yeah.
certain mindset, and also recognizing that perhaps there are pros and cons to
Yeah.
that way of
Yeah.
being. But yeah,
I,
that
I think
dialogue
we
piece.
And I think we are going to be aware of that, right? Because on the, I've had that level, that me as well. And I'm like, yeah, sometimes I will be a colonizer, but sometimes you're not ambitious enough. So let's go back and forth. Do you understand what I
Yeah,
mean? I'm happy to take that. Yes, I will come in and there will be some ways because I'm, born and raised in the UK. That's going to be the way, a lot of the way that I see the world.
yeah,
When I hit the Caribbean, I always slow down. I slow right down, pace slows down, but I still have that ambition and I still have that. Like, I don't understand how, again, in Barbados or Grenada, why we're importing 70% of our food. That makes, you can call me a colonizer. I will set up a company called Post-Colonial Food Company. That's what I would do, right?
colonizers
just
Inc.
to post-colonial trading company, all right? But for me, I look at that and I go, the sting of being called a colonizer in comparison to being able to say maybe teach and work with 2 or 3 individuals or organizations who could be more self-sufficient and sustaining based on the knowledge that I may have from elsewhere. I can take that sting. I can actually take it. I think it's important to be conscious that wherever we go in, right, we're not out there as rescuers or saviors trying to save individuals. But as an entrepreneur, what I will say this, I make no apology that when I see an opportunity and I see that there's an opportunity that can really kind of like benefit me and the stakeholders that I'm around, I'm going to go and take it. I'm not going to exploit, because I think it's important not to exploit. Again, I want to get my grandmother's house. That's an ideal stuff. That stuff is overgrown. No one's really managed it, and I want to kind of like keep that legacy and have that space. If I don't get my grandma's house, I'll go somewhere else. I'll see that opportunity, and I'll say this. And again, me, I'm not one to run away from controversy. But there are a lot of individuals who do not have any real strong connection with Grenada in terms of our diasporic heritage, in terms of our blackness, in terms of our Indianness, in terms of our, they come from, from eras and lands that are just see an opportunity and they'll exploit it. And they'll come in and they'll set up hotels. They'll come in and they'll set up spaces that local Grenadians can't go into because it's too expensive. They'll go in there and they'll buy up plots of land, and then they will tell you, like, what are you doing on here, because this is private and all the rest of it. And I'm like, well, if I go and buy a bit of land there, of course, you're going to have like, for me, I'd have I'd obviously want to have the property itself protected, so that, the land itself, because if you're growing and all the rest of it, blah, 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 blah. If someone's walking down my road, do you think I'm going to ask somebody why they're walking there? When a Grenadian's walking down the road, no, walk past the road. If you see a little mango from the tree, pick the mango. I'll go and pick the mango. I mean, I ain't worried, because I've seen, as I say, I go to the Caribbean, I see mango dropping on the road, right? So I ain't worried about that. But for me, when people can turn a blind eye or turn their back when someone else will come in and buy a beach resort or do something else and set up these plants and what have you, and they'll just go, right, that's fine, and then just take the money behind the hand and then return and call somebody like me and you a colonizer, I'm happy to take that brush. I'm really happy to do it. Because as I said, if I look at it and I know at the end of the day, there are people who will project their ideas onto what it is that you're doing. And, they may look at you and go, why are you getting all these foreigners to come into the country and what have you? And they're like, well, at the end of the day, if you've got people coming in and they can benefit the economy and they can benefit the culture, you can complain all you want, or you can just basically bask in the benefit of the fact that this person is, adding to the experiences of Grenada, because they will tell someone else, and and they're adding to the economy because they're going to spend their coin there. Look, I think I'm going to come back to the bit about the hospital. All being well, when that thing delivers, it'll be a lot less expensive to get healthcare in Grenada than it will be in America. Like, I think about, a couple of years ago when we went to Barbados, or me, my wife, and my daughters went to Barbados. And my youngest had to go, and she had some pain and had to go and get an emergency checkup in Barbados. And that would have taken us maybe 6-7 months to get it checked in the UK. We went to Barbados, checked it out. Barbados has got one of the best gynecological care spaces in the Caribbean and indeed in the world. Went in there, boom, 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 was in, did this thing, come back to England, and I'm like, I just spent $1,000 and it was sorted out in 2 to 3 days. In England, yeah, you got the NHS and all the rest of it, but that would have taken like months, and it would have taken me a hell of a lot more if I paid that on private insurance. And so I look at these things and go, look, there's a real great opportunities there, and I hope that members of us in the diaspora can tap into it. Let's rein in our colonialism if it does seem like we're being patronizing. But if our colonialism is something that, or that attitude is something that benefits the community, I don't think we should apologize about it.
Yeah, it's something I'm learning to live with. It's not, I moved here when I was 40, 4 decades of conditioning. I'm not going to switch that overnight, but recognizing 100%. Humility is important. And I think, just to wrap up, one of the things that I definitely feel about Grenada is, like, one of our strongest resources is our people. Like, for a tiny island, we're just so many, I know you're half Bajan, but there is something about us for our island and how much impact we have globally, and really exploring what does that look like to harness that in a way that benefits Grenada is something that really interests me. So I know that the CBI, which is now called Investment Migration Agency, they recently appointed a diaspora affairs person. He
Yeah,
doesn't reach out to people like you and me. They reach out to the CBI folks who have citizenship. So I'm like, hang on a minute, if they can do that for foreign folks, how about like us who actually genuinely care beyond just
yeah,
passports? Um, and I know that the Diaspora Homecoming event is coming up. How much that is on people's radar is yet to be seen. I reached out to a friend of ours, Sinai, to write about it
yeah,
in The Voice. And a lot of people are kind of saying, this is great, but it's in 3 months' time. I've got to book annual leave and flights.
yeah.
But I feel that the appetite to do what we can for Grenada is definitely there. From your perspective, as someone who's an entrepreneur who sees how things globally, what scope is there for collaboration and innovation amongst the diaspora, between the diaspora and Grenada, in ways that don't necessarily involve having to ask government permission or, get a whole load of funding in order to make things begin to happen?
So I believe across the board that government has a function. I think it has a function. But I think that the government has a function to oil the engine rather than being the engine.
Mm.
And it's one of the reasons why I think that, because it can be so easy, and I'm not accusing anybody of this in Grenada or Barbados. If it's there, as it probably is, but I'm not accusing anybody of this. But sometimes when there becomes that dependency on it, it's very, very easy to be tap into corruption. We see it. And again, although I use the islands, it's all over the place, right? Where people can do that. And I'm like, nah, at the end of the day, let's just see what we can do. We don't need to be that dependent on it. And so, we talk about the diaspora, the person that was selective. My dad bumped into him because my auntie passed away, and he was like, "Oh, do you know about this person?" And I was like, "No, I'll ask my one person who knows." And that's why I pinged it over to you to ask if you knew it was. And again, my dad was like, "Oh, he's doing it," and I was like, "Dad," I was like, "Absolutely for me, absolutely not. I've got no interest. What I've got more interest in is who are the people on the ground, as you say. Like for me, I would, I know that it would be lovely when I land in Grenada later this year for a group of us to be sat at a table, just have some food. A local chef does it. Whoever's doing, I know there are these the women who own their own drinks companies and rum and all the rest of it. So we come in and we kind of like totally patronize the
Mm.
people in that space, but then we have the connections around possibility. And for me, that stuff needs to be oiled by the larger system, but not shaped by it. And so I think when I think about what you're doing with the collective, and I know we've kind of like spoken off camera about this, but I think that's a beautiful thing where that kind of diaspora dynamic lands in the hands of individuals like you and others to pull that stuff together. The truth is once you kind of like get a rhythm and it goes, of course, government and other people are going to want to come and get a little bit of a look in and they're going to want to see the stuff, but you know exactly where you're coming from. They will have to add to it rather than drive it. So for me, I think, I think about a lot of the high commissions and diaspora communities that I've dealt with across different islands. And, a lot of the individuals in there are only in there for a short term.
Mm.
And so what they're doing when they're in there for a short term is they're trying to make their impact and do their stuff. And that might sound quite cynical. Whereas I look at this and I go, this is a 20-year plan. Like I'm 57, right? And I'm like, right, all things being well, like the next 20 years, this is what it looks like when I'm in Grenada and I'm in Barbados and moving in between that space. And that will go beyond any kind of like political realm. This is like looking at it into the future. And I got that because, one of the things I loved about for whichever way you look at it, because they can be a bit extractive as well. But China had a 25-year plan. China was like, we're going to build this Belt Road, we're going to build this Silk Road, we're going to go in. What do people need? Right, we're going to go and build the ports, we're going to build the airports, we're going to build the roads. Now, don't get me wrong, I think there are some incredibly flawed parts of that where a lot of the nations who worked with China, they actually didn't get a good deal. But at the end of the day, they're still looking you in your eye, whereas the previous colonialists just came and took it and just ran with it anyway. So at least for me, I think there's strong ports, there's stuff around airports. I know a lot of Chinese manufacturers are doing stuff around solar and alternative energy. I know in Barbados they're doing stuff around water at the moment, because Barbados, I think, is like 11th in water poverty in the whole world. I think it's got the equivalent of water poverty to Qatar. But I look at that entrepreneurially. I look at that and I go, man, when I get to go my house there, I want to tap into development funds that can kind of like go, what? How can we have better water filtration? When I get my house, I'm digging down into the ground, and that gallon tank that's going to be down there, all right, whichever where it is, it's going to be there. That stuff I want to recycle, because it will make much more sense to have it there. So I'd say we have to spark this stuff, and my challenge to you is to spark this stuff with the diaspora and run with it. And then if anybody looks aside and they kind of look at it and they, oh, I like this and I wouldn't mind being part of it, then let them join afterwards. And I'll say one last thing, actually, because it's coming back to something that you said earlier. So me, I love to random. You said that that very often there are individuals who are really reluctant and they hold on to their ideas. One thing I've learned is that the graveyard, our cemeteries, are full of people with ideas. Yes. Anyone can have an idea. The difference is whether or not you execute on the idea. So when people do that kind of stuff and kind of like cover their chest, I'm like, I'm happy for you. Like, absolutely brilliant. Cover it up, because, at the end of the day, I'll find a different way of being able to make it work. It's not the idea, it's the execution. And people need to be able to. It's like I just said to you, I'm happy to talk about satellite phones, and, especially, we should have at least one in St. Patrick, one in St. George, one in Carriacou, one in at a minimum. Somebody went and ran with that, I'm absolutely fine with it. If they don't do it right, then somebody else will come in and they will do it properly. We talk about the water management, all that kind of stuff. For me, I believe it's about the execution rather than just having the idea. So I'm never afraid to talk out about specific ideas. I talked to you about the payment stuff. It's very, very difficult to change the payment system, but I think it's doable. There's a lot of money in the Caribbean, and if you're living out in, I don't know, I'm going to show my ignorance now, right? But if you're living out in bush and you're living in a dense space and you don't have the coverage of Digicel or whoever the phone people are, right? Then that might be difficult to be able to do the money in the way that we would do if we're using cellular. But at the same time, there are online payments like Wise and others that we can send money to, send it in the local currency, and that person can make their way into town and go and get the bank if they can't get it on the phone. And so there are always ways of looking around it. And for me, ideas are great, but the execution is better. Execution is so much better.
Yeah, I think even more so in the age of AI, it's great to have great ideas. Take ChatGPT, but yeah, can you execute? And I think one of the things that I also observe when you're speaking is that real opportunity for folks born and raised here in the Caribbean to have great ideas, but to be consistently running up against brick walls, to have folks outside of the region who can be like, okay, these are some ways in which it's done in Romania or Tanzania, or these are the contexts that I have. I feel like systemically there's so much here that could be better, that finding workarounds, that innovating really is an opportunity that I think has to be explored. I have a client who moves from, Finland via Nigeria. And his background is in fintech, and he's working on a payment system here. And he's sort of really surprised at the bottlenecks that exist. And he was saying that, people told me this phrase that I'd never heard before, something about crabs, like crabs in a, and like he never heard the phrase crabs in a bottle, because in Nigeria, like you want to do it, you just do it. Who cares about the regulation? And I think, recognizing where having access to people with different mindsets and different visions, and also different networks and privileges. How can we get that to work for people here? I feel that's where it can become a game changer. And you don't necessarily have to, you're not in Grenada, yet we're having this conversation, we're talking about ideas. So thanks to the internet, there's a lot that's possible. Yes.
But yeah, there is, again, as I said, I think there is, I remember, I was actually thinking, I remember writing my grandmother a letter, sending it par avion to Grenada.
There's fold up envelopes with the red and white along
with the little blue, and you had to fold it up and send it. And, going into the house and seeing her keeping the little box of the letters that I sent her. And, and I remember, my grandmother didn't have a phone in her house. She had to literally walk down. There was a call, I mean, Myra, there's a call for you. She's got to leave the house, walk down, and go and get at the exchange. Things have moved on so swiftly now because we've got that communication in our pockets.
Yeah.
And so I go, if we can condense that stuff into a little phone, there's so many other things that we could do that will tap into the wider infrastructure that will be really, really good for us. And so for me, that's why, again, as I said, that's why I celebrate the entrepreneurial spirit where we can see stuff and go, right, there's a problem. How can we solve it? What solution do we need? And again, being aware, like as you said, your friend said, there is a, if you're coming from a place which is very entrepreneurial and very populous, like Nigeria and what have you, there's a very, very different attitude to where Grenada, which is a bit more laid back. But as an entrepreneur, you go and you go, right, okay, there's an opportunity here. And this might not just be Grenada, it might be St. Kitts and Nevis, it might be Trinidad. You've got the 34 plus islands that you can kind of like work that magic in the region. So yeah, I just look at it as I look at it as incredible opportunities, and just going, right. Yes, there will be bottlenecks. Yes, there will be pushbacks. But one of the things that entrepreneurialism teaches you is you go, right, when I plan this, what are all the things that could go wrong? What's the pushback that can be against it? Okay, and what do I need to make it right that will make it work? Once you're focused on that, fine.
Yes, and this is why I love having you in my circle. We met up and you were like, yeah, I'll give you like a session, and like 25 sessions later, here we are talking. But
By the way,
I,
anybody else listening,
oh
I
yes,
know her.
sorry, scratch that.
I know her. So just let me know you that. Anybody else you got to pay. She is my people's. Right. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, sorry, we talked about that earlier, didn't we?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
But I think the main thing that I really observe is that after 6 years in Grenada, I think that sort of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, anything is possible version has slightly become more um, moderated by the realities of the challenges here. And I know reality or awareness is a good thing, but also important is vision. And I think what people like you bring to the table is that sort of can do global perspective. And so it's really nice to be like, okay, David, I've been here. I'm like, not sure how to move forward. Be like, we can do this, we can do that, we can do that. And I think the more people with that sort of energy and the sort of people who were on the call that we had on Sunday, the more like-minded folks who can come together and kind of form a scrum and be like, okay, how do we move
Yes.
forward? That's when it becomes really exciting. So thank you.
Yeah. No, pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.